This is the Rio Verde. It once nourished a great civilization, one that dissolved long before our time. When we find the ruins of other people's ancestors, how do we decide what to call them? In the Verde Valley, the peoples of the past are honored, yet memorialized with the wrong names. Their narratives and voices remain buried in the past. When the Spanish arrived, they heard echoes of these voices among ruins, and other voices were silenced when men wearing another uniform took this valley by force. Montezuma's well is a natural sinkhole fed by an ancient underground spring. Over 1 million gallons of water flow through it every day, and through an underground channel, the water feeds a clear creek. This well is at the center of a native creation story. Various southwestern tribes trace their ancestry back to the people who built the dwellings here. Some even say that their people were born from the water at this well. With this natural gift, civilization flourished, and humans were drawn here at the start of the 7th century. Those who settled here dug canals to farm floodplains. As their society grew and advanced, they became known for their iconic pottery, and even traded with others as far away as the Pacific coast and Central America. But not everyone shows their appreciation for the past. 138 years ago, an American pioneer vandalized this ancient dwelling. He painted his name here to sell photos of this place as he had found it, symbolic of the culture he came from, the same culture that would come to rename countless sites across the Southwest after Aztec rulers. A few miles away, carved into the face of a limestone cliff, sits a place called Montezuma's Castle National Monument. The Aztec Emperor Montezuma never had anything to do with this place. He died centuries ago, thousands of miles away, without ever having set foot in Arizona. Yet it wasn't the Spanish who named this place. It was the American settlers of the late 1800s who assumed something this impressive must have been built by somebody they'd already heard of. In the 1930s, 2 University of Arizona students oversaw the excavation of an entire pueblo mound here in the Verde Valley. There was a hilltop here covered in rubble and artifacts. They dug it up and pieced it back together as best as they could. I'm grateful they did it. I'm also grateful they didn't name it something dumb like Montezuma's Fortress. We now call this place Tuzigut National Monument. The word Tuzigut, of course, is made up. It's the bastardization of an Apache word that's supposed to mean crooked water. The archaeologists and anthropologists of my day referred to the builders of these structures as Asinagua. That name originally came from a white American historian trying to speak Spanish in order to describe the past. Poorly, I'll say, because to be Sinagua means to be without water. The actual names of those who built these sites remains a mystery. We don't know what they called themselves. The inhabitants of these places abandoned them as their world began to change somewhere in the 1300s. They weren't conquered or displaced. Prolonged drought, resource depletion, and internal conflict drove them away. All of these dwellings were slowly abandoned as the people here joined up with other groups and moved on, leaving their ancestors' homes behind to decay. The people who came to this valley next were the Yavapai and the Tonto Apache. These groups traversed the valley throughout the seasons, hunting and collecting. They were here when Spanish guns and cannons arrived to create Nueva España. For nearly 2 centuries, the Spanish Empire kept Apache bands at bay by building fortified presidios in the Sonoran Desert far south of here. They discouraged raiding by offering the Apache food rations, materials, and the occasional chance to trade. But after Mexico broke free from the Spanish crown, the new nation decided it would no longer pay for peace with the Apache. It would wage war on them instead. And that quickly became an overwhelming war on two fronts when the United States came looking for land too. That's when the maps changed. New flags went up, and the first troops arrived in the Verde Valley to protect white people's farms. The years that followed are referred to as the Indian Wars by the US military. What happened precisely during this time was a violent, coordinated campaign to remove every native person from land that American settlers wanted. In Arizona history, this period is often referred to as the Apache Wars, though the conflict involved many more tribes and peoples than the Apache alone. This here is Fort Verde. It's one of the most well-preserved military installations from the Indian Wars. 22 buildings were completed here by 1873, but there are only a handful remaining today. It's a strange feeling. The plaques at places like this beckon me to be patriotic while asking me to turn away from the nasty realities of this period. There's a lot of material here on the Buffalo soldiers who were stationed here and the Indian scouts who assisted the army in their mission. It's depressing. You'll never convince me that this exploitation was patriotism. During the Apache Wars, the US Army put black soldiers in the most dangerous corners of the frontier and created conditions where native peoples had no choice but to turn on each other. Both groups were offered an illusion of belonging in a country that had already made clear that they didn't belong. The land these men seized for Uncle Sam would never be for them. It wouldn't even be for their children. In 1871, these men in uniform confined the Yavapai and the Apache to 40 miles on either side of the river. The original Rio Verde reservation existed for only 4 years. During this time, the natives were self-sufficient farmers. Their harvests were plentiful enough to sell surplus crops back to the soldiers who kept them here. That was a big problem for white people far south of here. A powerful group known as the Tucson Ring dreamed of making money by farming this land and supplying the army themselves. So they petitioned Congress to move the reservation somewhere else. Congress complied, and it was the men who slept in these rooms who forced the march. In the winter of 1875, President Grant had the army march the entire native population here, 180 miles to a newly created prison camp in southeastern Arizona. That march is remembered as the Exodus. Over 100 people died along the way in the cold wilderness, and many more would die from disease in the overcrowded prison they would be kept in for 25 years. Where they were imprisoned was much drier and hotter than the valley they had been banished from. It was land that the settlers knew they didn't want and couldn't sell. This place was called the San Carlos Apache Reservation. That name came from Spanish missionaries who had passed through there generations earlier. Even in exile, the land these people were banished to carried someone else's language. The Verde Valley was a massive win for settlers and for the robber barons of the era. Soon, Fort Verde became unnecessary and was abandoned. Within just a year of the Exodus, copper was discovered in the Black Hills above the Verde Valley, and the company town of Jerome was born. In true Gilded Age fashion, this place was named after its primary investor, Eugene Jerome, a New Yorker who never set foot here. At the center of life in Jerome was billionaire copper king William A. Clark, owner of the United Verde Copper Company and of many other mines throughout the West. We remember him as one of the definitive robber barons of this period. Clark bribed the Montana state legislature for a senator seat, back when you could still do that out in the open. Further down this mountain on the Verde Valley floor, Clark built a second company town to house his smelter workers, and he named it Clarkdale. He truly was a man ahead of his time in both corruption and vanity. At its height, Jerome was home to 15,000 people. But when the mines here ran dry, the town was abandoned by the company, Clark's descendants, and everyone else. The bustling mining community that had once flourished here dwindled down to 50 residents by the 1950s. Jerome was abandoned almost as deliberately as it had been built. After its riches were extracted, people dispersed, and the new monument was left here to rust on the side of the mountain. The same forces that killed this town came back decades later to prey on its corpse. Now Jerome gets about 1 million tourists a year, mostly for the ghosts. This place has reinvented itself as one of Arizona's premier haunted destinations. Hotels advertise haunted rooms, and restaurants advertise haunted hamburgers. The town's abandonment has now become the product. Even in death, this place found a way to make money. 20 miles down the road, Tuzigut and Montezuma's castle receive their visitors differently. There are no ghost tours there, just small plaques and the structures themselves, standing in the same places they've stood for 1,000 years. Some spots want so desperately to sell you on the feeling of a haunting. And in other places, entire peoples and ways of life have been erased so thoroughly that there are no ghost stories left to sell. What haunts me is the gap between what happened here and what we've chosen to remember. We still haven't corrected names that we've known to be wrong for over 100 years. And to name something is to take possession of it. One day our civilization will cease to exist, and our voices will disappear with it. I wonder what the people who come across our ruins will decide to call us.